When I came back from deployment, half the house was empty, the joint account was drained, and my wife's SUV was parked in the driveway beside a car I didn't recognize. Inside, there were 2 coffee mugs on the counter, still steaming. Hers and his. My name's Nathan Cole, 39 years old, Staff Sergeant with the 82nd Airborne. I'd been deployed in Kuwait for 8 months. Before I left, my wife, Emily, kissed me at the airport and told me she couldn't wait for me to come home. 3 weeks before my return, she stopped answering calls, then texts, then emails. I thought maybe she was just overwhelmed, taking care of the mortgage, our daughter's school, everything. I was wrong. When I opened the front door that afternoon, I didn't find my home. I found a stranger's version of it. Half the furniture was gone, our family photos replaced with neutral prints from Target. My clothes were in boxes stacked neatly by the garage door. The man's boots, mud still on them, were by the couch. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence where my family used to be. I found a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry, Nate. I can't do this anymore. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The lawyer will contact you." No signature. No explanation. Just that. I checked our joint account. 0 balance. She'd emptied it 2 days before I got home. The savings too. $160,000 gone. The house, my house, was now legally hers. She'd filed for divorce while I was overseas and claimed I'd abandoned her. I read the email from her attorney 3 times before replying with one word, understood. That night, I slept in a motel off Route 19. The room smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. I didn't drink, didn't call anyone, didn't rage or cry. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the last year. The distance, the short answers, the late-night work meetings. I'd ignored them all, thinking love could survive silence. In the morning, I called my commanding officer, told him I needed a few weeks before reporting back. "Take the time you need," he said. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. I drove back to the house once more, parked across the street, and waited. At exactly 7:42 a.m., a man stepped out of my front door wearing my robe, holding my coffee mug. He kissed my wife on the porch before heading to her car. I took a photo, then another. Then I started planning. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make sure that when this was over, they'd understand exactly who they'd tried to destroy. My first instinct was to confront them. But anger fades fast when you've seen real chaos. What doesn't fade is precision. I'd spent 15 years running logistics in combat zones, tracking supply chains, securing intelligence, managing people who thought they could outsmart the system. Emily had no idea who she was dealing with. I started by documenting everything. Bank statements, property transfers, every email and message she'd sent in the past year. Then I pulled my military pay logs and deployment records. Every date, every order, proof that I hadn't abandoned anyone. I printed them, filed them, and labeled the folder proof. The next day, I visited the county clerk's office. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, told me Emily had refinanced the house 3 months ago. Her new co-borrower was a man named Tyler Mason, the same man I'd seen wearing my robe. She'd forged my signature on every document. When I asked how that was possible, the clerk just shrugged. "Happens more than you'd think," she said. I thanked her and left. Back in my truck, I stared at the printed copies in the passenger seat. This wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud. And fraud, unlike heartbreak, leaves a paper trail. That night, I called an old friend, Eric, who worked in military legal. I didn't give him details, just asked a hypothetical question about property fraud during deployment. He paused before saying it could carry serious federal consequences if proven. If proven was all I needed to hear. I created a timeline: the withdrawal of funds, the forged refinance, the divorce filing, and the date she'd moved Tyler in. Every move they made intersected with my absence overseas. I kept my emotions out of it. No name-calling, no theories, just facts. By the weekend, I had enough to file a report, but I waited. Timing mattered. If I moved too soon, they'd cover their tracks. I needed them comfortable, overconfident. So I let them think I'd given up. I stopped calling. Stopped showing up near the house. On Monday morning, Emily's attorney emailed me about signing final divorce papers. I replied politely that I'd review them by the end of the week. In truth, I had no intention of signing anything yet. I wanted to see just how deep the lies went before I moved. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence was just the sound of my patience loading like a weapon. The longer I stayed quiet, the bolder they became. Emily started posting pictures again. New furniture, weekend trips, a photo of her and Tyler standing in front of my truck, the one still registered in my name. Her caption read, "New beginnings." I didn't react. Every post was another breadcrumb, another timestamp tying her lies together. I knew from experience that the best way to dismantle an enemy wasn't through confrontation. It was through observation. Let them reveal themselves. Let them get comfortable in the illusion of control. I created a second phone under a new number and started following her social accounts from there. Within weeks, I mapped out her new life, her work, her patterns, even where Tyler worked, a local construction firm that specialized in home remodels. That detail stuck with me. It explained why the kitchen tiles had changed, why the locks looked new when I came home. One evening, I parked 2 blocks away from the house. The lights were on in the living room. My daughter, Sophie, wasn't there. She was staying with Emily's parents, according to the custody request I'd received. I sat in the dark, watching silhouettes move through the house I'd built with my own hands. Tyler was laughing, loud and careless. Emily passed by the window, wine glass in hand, barefoot, happy. It should have broken me. It didn't. It focused me. The next day, I contacted the mortgage company listed on the refinance documents. I told them I was following up on a suspected forgery. The representative asked for identification and copies of the paperwork. I emailed everything I had. 2 days later, I received a call from their fraud investigation team. They confirmed what I already knew. The signature wasn't mine, and the notary listed hadn't worked for them in over a year. They'd escalated to their legal department. That was the first crack in their perfect little world. But it wasn't enough. I wanted the truth exposed publicly, not just in paperwork. So I kept digging. Tyler had a criminal record. Nothing major, just a suspended license and a charge for disorderly conduct. But there was also a sealed case from 2 years ago, related to financial misconduct with a former employer. That was interesting. I started keeping notes in a leather-bound notebook, every page dated, every entry factual. It wasn't rage anymore, it was data. And data, when arranged correctly, becomes evidence. I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was building a case. By the 3rd week, I had a complete picture of what Emily and Tyler had done. They hadn't just taken the money. They'd used it to renovate the house, my house, preparing to flip it for profit. Tyler had filed the construction permits himself. That was his mistake. His name tied directly to the fraudulent refinance paperwork. The same property, the same timeline, the same forged documents. It was all connected now. I drove to the county recorder's office again and requested copies of every property record linked to my address. The clerk glanced at me like she'd seen this before, then realizing too late how deep betrayal can go. I didn't explain. I just thanked her and left with a folder thick enough to collapse a marriage twice. At home, I scanned everything, labeled each file by date and category: financial, property, legal, personal. I even kept screenshots of her posts showing purchases, new furniture, vacations, a kitchen remodel she bragged about online. She'd documented her own crimes in real time. I didn't sleep much that week. My days started at dawn, ended near midnight. I worked methodically, like I was back in the field, tracking a target. I even created a separate drive labeled Operation Homefront. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. She'd taken everything, but she hadn't taken my discipline. One night, I sat in the truck outside the house again. The blinds were open this time. Tyler was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Emily was pacing, shouting, her body language tense. I couldn't hear them, but I could read enough from the way she pointed toward the window, then toward the door. Maybe she'd seen my truck earlier that day. Maybe she was just paranoid. Either way, cracks were forming. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. It read, "You need to stop watching the house. This isn't healthy." I didn't respond. Instead, I added the number to my growing list of evidence. Because here's the thing, Tyler might have been confident, but he wasn't smart. The text came from his company-issued phone. That gave me an idea. I reached out to one of his former supervisors, a man named Curtis who still lived in town. I didn't mention names at first, just asked if he remembered why Tyler's case had been sealed. Curtis hesitated, then said quietly that Tyler had been accused of embezzlement but cut a deal to avoid prosecution. He thought the record was sealed for reputation management. That was when I knew exactly how to end this. Not with emotion, with exposure. I didn't rush the next step. Timing was everything. One wrong move, and they'd spin the story, turn me into the bitter ex-soldier who couldn't let go. So I waited until Emily's lawyer reached out again, pressing for my signature on the divorce agreement. That was my opening. I told him I'd be happy to sign, but only after a full financial reconciliation. He seemed confused. I said there were discrepancies in our joint accounts, and I wanted to ensure everything was documented properly. He agreed reluctantly, probably thinking I was just stalling. That was fine. It gave me the window I needed. Over the next 2 days, I compiled everything into a single dossier: bank withdrawals, mortgage fraud, property transfers, the text from Tyler, and even the screenshots of Emily's posts showing the renovations financed by stolen funds. I added the information Curtis had given me about Tyler's embezzlement deal, then cross-referenced every date to prove the money trail. When I was done, the file looked less like a divorce folder and more like an internal affairs investigation. Then I made a quiet call to the state's Financial Crimes Division. I didn't give names, only details: military deployment, spouse's unauthorized use of funds, possible forgery, and suspected collusion with a partner who had a criminal background. The agent on the line asked for evidence. I said it was ready. He asked if I was willing to file a formal statement. I told him I'd rather meet in person. 3 days later, I sat across from 2 investigators in a gray office with no windows. I gave them everything, laid it out calmly, methodically, like I was briefing a mission. They listened without interrupting, occasionally exchanging looks. When I finished, one of them said they'd open a preliminary case file. It could take time, but if what I provided checked out, they'd pursue charges. I nodded and thanked them. Driving home that evening, I passed my old house again. The porch light was on. Emily's laughter carried faintly through the open window. Tyler's truck was in the driveway, freshly washed. They had no idea what was coming. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. Revenge is emotional, messy. What I wanted was balance. I wanted the scales evened, not with anger, but with precision. I'd built a case like a soldier builds a perimeter, quietly, thoroughly, without warning. Now all I had to do was wait for the first impact. 2 weeks passed before I heard anything. Then, one morning, a letter arrived from the Financial Crimes Division, requesting additional documentation. It meant they'd verified enough to escalate the case. I smiled, folded the letter neatly, and placed it in my proof folder. The quiet part of the plan was working. Meanwhile, Emily kept posting. Brunches, vacations, new jewelry. It was like she was daring the universe to notice. And the more she flaunted, the more careless she became. One night, she uploaded a short video tour of the renovated house, bragging about the new look. In the background, for less than 2 seconds, a manila envelope sat on the counter with the mortgage company's logo visible. It was dated only 3 days earlier. That meant she'd been contacted. I froze the frame, took a screenshot, and added it to the file. By the following week, I started noticing movement. Tyler's company truck disappeared for days, and Emily's lawyer suddenly went quiet. That's how I knew the investigation had reached them. The walls were tightening. I stayed invisible. No contact, no texts, no online activity. Just observation. Then, out of nowhere, Emily called. I let it ring twice before answering. Her tone was soft, rehearsed. She said she wanted to talk like adults, that we could settle things without dragging lawyers or the government into it. I listened in silence. When she asked if we could meet, I told her calmly that I'd think about it. After I hung up, I documented the call and sent the summary to the investigator. A week later, I was summoned for a formal deposition. They'd found evidence of forgery on the refinance and suspicious withdrawals tied to Tyler's account. The agent told me it could turn into a joint state and federal case if money had crossed certain lines. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. As I left the office, I saw Emily for the first time since deployment. She was walking out of another room, pale and tense, clutching a folder against her chest. She looked right at me, but didn't say a word. Tyler wasn't with her. His absence said everything. Driving away, I felt the same stillness I'd felt on patrol before a mission went live. That strange, perfect calm before everything changes. I didn't know how the next stage would unfold, But I knew this much. Control was shifting, quietly, decisively, in my favor. A month later, the court date arrived. The divorce hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp, but it wasn't just a divorce hearing anymore. The financial investigation had become part of the proceedings. I showed up early, wearing a plain suit, carrying only a slim folder. No lawyer beside me this time. I didn't need one. Everything that needed to be said was already in the documents. Emily arrived 10 minutes late. Her expression flickered between anger and panic. She was dressed sharply, like she thought appearances could still save her. Tyler wasn't there. I'd heard through a friend that he'd been questioned by investigators and quietly resigned from his job afterward. That told me he was cooperating. When the judge entered, the air changed. Emily's attorney started with a speech about emotional distress and how difficult the deployment had been on her. He said I'd neglected my wife, left her alone to handle finances and the home. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. The more they spoke, the deeper they dug themselves into the hole. Then it was my turn. I handed the clerk my folder, bank records, mortgage documents, the toxicology report equivalent for financial fraud. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, frowning. My voice stayed calm as I explained how every withdrawal matched Emily's access, how my signature had been forged on the refinance, how Tyler Mason's name appeared on property filings, and how both had benefited financially while I was overseas. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming it was irrelevant to the divorce. The judge disagreed. Fraud, he said, went to the heart of the marriage's breakdown. By the end of the hearing, Emily's confidence was gone. She sat silent as the judge ruled that all marital assets were frozen pending investigation. The house, the vehicles, the remaining accounts, everything was locked. He also ordered a forensic audit of her finances and referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential charges. When it was over, I stood, thanked the court, and walked out. Emily didn't look at me. She just stared at the table like she couldn't believe what had happened. Outside, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that makes the air feel heavy. I didn't smile, didn't celebrate. I just breathed. Months of silence, of discipline, had led to this moment. And for the first time since I'd come home, I felt the ground settle beneath my feet. The war was shifting, and this time, it was on my terms. After the court hearing, I went home to silence. No victory music, no celebration, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. That kind of quiet felt heavier than noise, but cleaner somehow. It meant the chaos was finally starting to fade. 2 days later, my attorney called to confirm that the state had officially opened a criminal case. Emily and Tyler were under investigation for forgery and financial misconduct. I didn't ask what penalties they might face. I didn't care. My part was done. A week passed before I saw Emily again. She showed up outside my motel early in the morning, wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast. Her voice trembled when she said she wanted to explain that it had never been about money. I let her talk. She said she'd been lonely, overwhelmed, scared. That Tyler had convinced her it was the only way to stay afloat. Every word sounded like a script she'd rehearsed in the mirror. When she finally stopped, I told her calmly that explanations didn't undo actions. I said she'd made choices, and choices have consequences. She started to cry, but there was no relief in her tears, only fear. She knew the storm was still building. I told her I hoped, for Sophie's sake, she'd cooperate with the investigators. Then I walked back into my room and closed the door. The next few weeks were strange. My name started circulating among local veterans groups. Apparently, word had spread that I'd uncovered a major fraud case while on deployment. People reached out, offering help, jobs, or just thanks. But I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a man who'd learned that silence can be more powerful than shouting. Then one morning, I got a call from the district attorney's office. They said Tyler had confessed to falsifying signatures under Emily's direction. In exchange for cooperation, he'd receive a reduced charge. Emily, however, would face the full weight of the case. I listened, said thank you, and hung up. That evening, I drove past the house one last time. It was dark, the for sale sign tilted in the yard. The porch light was broken. Everything they'd tried to build on lies was collapsing quietly, piece by piece. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger, just distance. The kind that comes when a war ends, and you realize you survived not because you fought the loudest, but because you never stopped thinking. Months went by before the next court date. By then, the story had spread beyond the county. Local news picked up the case after the district attorney filed formal charges for mortgage fraud, identity theft, and perjury. They didn't use our names, but everyone in town knew. Friends from the base called to ask if it was true. I confirmed quietly that it was. They didn't ask for details. Soldiers understand silence better than anyone. When the trial began, I didn't plan to testify, but the prosecution called me anyway to verify my deployment records and confirm the timeline. I spoke plainly, without emotion. The prosecutor handled the rest. The paper trail told the story better than I ever could. Every withdrawal, every fake signature, every text. It was all there, laid bare under fluorescent lights and public record. Emily sat 2 rows ahead of me, shoulders tense, jaw tight. She didn't look back once. Tyler sat beside his lawyer, avoiding her eyes completely. He'd already taken the plea deal. She was alone now, facing the consequences she thought she'd avoided. The verdict came quickly, guilty on all counts except one. The judge didn't hold back. Sentencing would be decided in a few weeks, but restitution was already in motion. The house, the remaining assets, and the funds that could be recovered would be transferred back to me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same system she'd tried to manipulate now returned everything she'd stolen. When court adjourned, I walked out before the reporters could get close. I didn't want headlines. I didn't want revenge stories. I wanted peace. Outside, a cold wind swept through the parking lot, carrying the last of autumn with it. I stood there for a moment, watching the leaves scatter, and realized something unexpected. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate was loud. It burned hot and short. What I felt now was colder, quieter. It was understanding. I understood that betrayal doesn't start with a single act. It starts with silence, the kind that grows between 2 people until someone decides to fill it with something else. As I drove away, I passed the courthouse clock tower. It struck noon, each chime echoing against the stone buildings downtown. Each sound felt like a closing chapter. For the first time in nearly a year, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was finally done. Sentencing day came 6 weeks later. I didn't plan to attend, but that morning, something in me wanted closure, not just justice. I arrived early, sat in the back row, unnoticed. Emily walked in wearing a plain gray suit, her hair tied back, no makeup this time. She looked smaller, like the world had finally pressed down on her long enough for the truth to leave a mark. The judge didn't waste time. He spoke about betrayal, the abuse of trust, and how she had exploited the system while I was serving overseas. Then he delivered the sentence, 18 months in a state facility, reduced for cooperation and restitution already paid. She didn't argue, didn't cry, just nodded once and looked down. Tyler's sentence had come weeks earlier, 6 months probation and a permanent record. He'd already left the state. When it was over, I stepped outside before anyone else. The air was cold, the sky clear. I could see my breath when I exhaled. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken since coming home. A few days later, I met with my attorney to finalize the transfer of the house and assets. Everything was legally restored in my name. But standing in that empty house again, I realized it no longer felt like home. The walls held too many ghosts. I sold it within a month and used the money to start over in a small town near the coast. Somewhere quiet, somewhere without memories. I found work training new recruits in logistics, teaching them what the military had taught me: patience, planning, precision. Some nights, after drills ended, I'd sit outside the barracks watching the sun sink behind the trees. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt earned. Every so often, I'd get updates from the attorney. Emily was serving her sentence without issue. She'd asked if I'd be willing to let Sophie visit once she was released. I said yes, because despite everything, she was still Sophie's mother. And Sophie deserved to know that strength doesn't come from anger, it comes from endurance. I kept one thing from the old life, a single photo. It was from deployment, me standing in the desert under a sky that stretched forever. I looked at it sometimes and remembered what I'd learned. Some wars end with explosions, others with silence. But the quiet victories, the ones no one sees, those last the longest. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.